The unwanted guardian Princess Uravel stood before the tall windows of her father's throne room, her silver skin reflecting the light of 3 distant suns that warmed the Valorian homeworld. She was not happy. "A human?" she asked, turning to face Emperor Calver with disbelief written across her delicate features. Her father sat upon his crystal throne, ancient and wise, his 4 eyes watching her with patience that came from centuries of rule. "The Galactic Council has assigned him personally," the Emperor said, his voice calm and measured. "Sergeant Kang Duhyan comes highly recommended by the Human Alliance." "The Human Alliance?" Uravel interrupted, her tone dripping with contempt. "They joined the Council barely 50 cycles ago, and now they presume to protect Valorian royalty?" She paced across the polished floor, her ceremonial robes flowing behind her like liquid starlight. The Valorians were among the oldest species in known space, builders of empires when humans were still throwing rocks at each other in caves on their death world called Earth. "Father, I have commanded fleets," she continued. "I have negotiated treaties that prevented wars across 12 systems. I do not need some primitive mammal following me around like a trained beast." The Emperor raised one slender hand, silencing her. "You travel to Station Axiar through contested space," he said. "The Keth Syndicate grows bolder each day, and our own guards, while equipped with the finest technology, lack something the humans possess." "And what is that?" "The instinct for violence," the Emperor replied. "We evolved beyond such things millions of years ago, but the humans, they carry it still, sleeping just beneath their skin. It is why the galaxy calls them Deathworlders." Uravel scoffed at the word. She had seen humans before at diplomatic functions, soft-looking creatures with only 2 eyes, fragile bodies wrapped in thin skin, no claws, no natural armor, no venom. They seemed like prey animals that had somehow stumbled into civilization by accident. "I will accept this insult," she finally said, "but only because you commanded, Father." The Emperor smiled sadly, as if he knew something she did not. The human arrived the next morning. Uravel watched from her balcony as the transport shuttle landed in the palace courtyard, and when the doors opened, she felt her expectations confirmed. Sergeant Kang Duhyan was utterly unremarkable. He stood at average height for his species, with black hair cut short and a face that seemed designed to be forgotten. He wore a simple gray uniform with no decorations, no medals, nothing to suggest he was anything special when he walked. He moved quietly, almost invisibly, like he was trying not to be noticed. "Your Highness," he said when they were introduced, bowing his head respectfully. "It is an honor to serve as your escort." His voice was soft, his expression neutral, his manner perfectly polite. Uravel did not offer her hand in greeting. "You will stay 10 paces behind me at all times," she instructed coldly. "You will not speak unless spoken to, and you will not embarrass me before the other delegates. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Highness." No argument, no wounded pride, no reaction at all. She found it irritating over the following days as they prepared for departure. Uravel tested him with subtle cruelty. She made him wait for hours outside her chambers. She spoke about humans as if he were not present. She laughed with her handmaidens about the primitiveness of Earth culture while he stood silently nearby. He never complained. He never showed anger. He simply watched, waited, and followed his orders with mechanical precision. "He is like a robot," her handmaiden Cyriline observed one evening. "Does he even have feelings? Who can say with humans?" Uravel replied dismissively. "They are barely more evolved than the beasts they share their planet with." But sometimes, when she glanced at him unexpectedly, she noticed something strange. His eyes were always moving, scanning doorways, windows, crowds, calculating, assessing, measuring distances and angles that meant nothing to her once. She caught him studying the palace security systems late at night, noting patrol routes and response times in a small notebook he carried. "What are you doing?" she demanded, "Learning the environment, Your Highness," he answered simply. "Why?" "So I can protect you better." She laughed at his seriousness and walked away on the day of departure. The royal cruiser Starlight Throne lifted off from Valoria. Prime, with all the ceremony befitting a princess of the Empire Ravel, settled into her luxurious quarters, surrounded by her handmaidens and servants. Ready to endure the long journey to Station Axish, did not spare a single thought for the human stationed outside her door. He was beneath her notice. A formality imposed by politicians, a symbol of the council's interference. In Valorian affairs, she could not imagine any scenario where she would actually need his protection as. The ship jumped to faster than light travel, and the stars stretched into lines of light outside her window. Sergeant Kang Buhayan sat alone in the corridor. He cleaned his weapons methodically, checking each piece with practiced hands. His face was calm, but his mind was working constantly, running through scenarios, calculating threats, preparing for dangers that no one else on the ship seemed to consider. He had read the intelligence reports about the Keth Syndicate, knew what routes they preferred to ambush. He knew the royal cruiser was a target worth more than most planets, and he knew, with the certainty that came from years of combat experience, that something was wrong about this mission. He could feel it in his bones. The same instinct that had kept him alive through a dozen wars on a dozen worlds. Something bad was coming, and when it arrived, he would be ready. The long journey 5 days into the voyage, Princess Uravel began to notice the human's strange habits. He slept only in short intervals, never more than a few hours at a time, and always with his back against a wall and his face toward the door. He ate sparingly, consuming the bland protein bars he carried with him rather than the fine food served in the ship's dining halon. And he was always watching. "Does your escort ever rest?" Captain Veltoran asked during their evening meal. Glancing toward the corridor, where Duhain stood like a statue, Iravel waved her hand dismissively. "Who knows what goes on in a human mind?" She replied, "Perhaps his species does not require sleep like civilized beings." The captain nodded. Though he seemed uncertain, he had commanded vessels for over 200 years, and something about the human unsettled him in ways he could not explain. Later that night, Duhayan approached the captain with a request. "Sir, I have analyzed our current route," the human said quietly, showing him a datapad with navigation charts. "There are 3 points where we pass through regions known for Keth Syndicate activity. I recommend we adjust our course by approximately 4 degrees to avoid these zones." Captain Velteron studied the charts with his superior Valorian intellect and found no flaws in the human's analysis. The suggested route would add only 6 hours to their journey, but accepting tactical advice from a human felt like an insult to his professional pride. "The Starlight Throne is equipped with the most advanced shields and weapons in the Valorian fleet," he said, handing back the datapad. "We have nothing to fear from pirates. With respect." "Sir, your concern is noted, Sergeant, but unnecessary. You may return to your post." Duhayan accepted the dismissal. Without argument, he bowed slightly and walked away, his face revealing nothing of what he felt inside, but his hands moved to check his weapons once more. And he began mentally preparing for scenarios he hoped would never happen. The following day, Uravel found herself alone with the human in the observation deck. She had come to watch the nebula they were passing through, a swirling mass of purple and gold gases that painted the void with impossible beauty. She did not expect him to be there. "You should not be here," she said coldly. "This deck is reserved for royal passengers." "My apologies, Your Highness," he replied. "I was checking the exterior hull integrity sensors. They showed some irregularities that I wanted to verify visually." "Hull integrity?" She laughed. "Are you an engineer now as well as a soldier?" "I am whatever you need me to be." The answer was so simple, so sincere, That it caught her off guard, she studied him for a moment. This strange human who seemed to have no ego, no pride, no desire for recognition. Why are humans always so paranoid? She asked, genuinely curious despite herself. The galaxy has been at peace for generations. There are laws, treaties, councils to resolve disputes. Why do your people act as if war waits around every corner? Duhayan was silent for a long moment, watching the nebula swirl outside the window. Because we remember what it costs to relax. He finally answered. What does that mean? On Earth, we have a saying, he said, turning to face her. Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. My species has a long history. Your Highness, and most of it is written in blood, we learned that peace is not a natural state. It is something that must be defended every single day. Uravel found his words primitive and depressing. The Valorians had evolved beyond such brutish thinking millions of years ago. They solved problems with intellect, diplomacy, superior technology, not with violence and paranoia. How exhausting it must be, she said, to live in constant fear. It is not fear, Your Highness, Duhayan replied. It is readiness. There is a difference. She dismissed his philosophy with a wave of her hand and returned to her quarters, thinking no more about the conversation, but his words lingered in her mind longer than she expected 2 days later. The ship's communication officer detected a distress signal, a merchant vessel, registry identifying it as the Golden Promise, was broadcasting an emergency beacon from a nearby asteroid field. They claimed their engines have failed. The officer reported, they are requesting immediate assistance. Captain Velteron considered the situation carefully. Galactic law required all vessels to respond to legitimate distress calls, and refusing could damage the Valorian Empire's reputation for honor and compassion. Set course to intercept, he ordered. Prepare rescue teams. Duhayan appeared on the bridge without being summoned. Captain, I strongly advise against this course of action, he said, his voice calm but urgent. This is all the characteristics of a Keth ambush. The location, the timing, the nature of the distress call. Sergeant, I have already made my decision. Please, sir, at least raise shields and prepare weapons before we approach. The captain hesitated, annoyed by the human's persistence, but unable to ignore the logic entirely. Very well, he conceded. Shields to standby. Weapons on alert, but we will render aid as required by law. The Duhayan nodded and left the bridge, walked directly to Uravel's quarters, and took up position outside her door. His hand rested casually on his sidearm, and his eyes watched the corridor with new intensity. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the asteroid field. The Golden Promise drifted among the rocks, dark and seemingly lifeless, and then, from behind the largest asteroid, 3 warships emerged with weapons already charging. The Keth had been waiting. Duhayan drew his weapon and moved closer to the princess's door. His eyes had changed, now cold and focused, all traces of the quiet, unremarkable servant vanishing in an instant. Something ancient stirred awake inside him, something that had been sleeping since humans first learned to hunt in the tall grass of Africa, something deadly. Teeth in the dark. The first blast rocked the starlight throne so hard that Princess Uravel was thrown from her bedalongs, screamed through the corridors as emergency lights painted everything in harsh red. She scrambled to her feet, her heart racing with a fear she had never known before. Your Highness. Cyriline burst through the door with 2 other handmaidens close behind. We are under attack. The captain has ordered evacuation to the escape pods. Another explosion shook the ship, and somewhere in the distance, metal screamed as it tore apart. Tiravel grabbed her handmaiden's arm and ran into the corridor. Hyan was already there, his weapon drawn, his body positioned between her and every possible angle of attack. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice different now, harder, sharper, carrying an authority that left no room for argument. Move quickly, but do not run. Running creates panic. For once, Uravel did not argue. They moved through the ship as chaos erupted around them. Valorian guards ran past in confusion, their advanced weapons clutched in hands that had never known real combat. The ship's eye announced hull breaches on multiple decks, and the distant sound of boarding craft clamping onto the hull echoed through the metal walls. "The Keth are boarding," Duhayan said, mostly to himself. "They want prisoners, not debris. They will target the royal quarters first." "How can you know that?" Uravel demanded. "Because it is what I would do." They reached a junction in the corridor where 5 paths met. Duhayan held up his fist, and everyone stopped. Uravel heard it then. The heavy footsteps of something large approaching from the left passage. Then she saw them. The Keth were reptilian nightmares, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall, with scales like armor and claws that could tear through metal. Their eyes glowed with predatory hunger, and their mouths were filled with teeth designed for ripping flesh from bone. They were the most feared pirates in the quadrant, responsible for countless raids, kidnappings, and massacres across a dozen systems. 3 of them blocked the corridor, and more were coming behind. Ion raised his weapon and fired twice. 2 Keth dropped, perfectly placed shots burning through their eyes and into their brains, but his weapon clicked empty. Before he could fire a third time, the power cell depleted far faster than it should have. The ship's power fluctuations must have affected the charge. The surviving Keth roared and charged. Hyan threw himself forward to meet it, ducking under its slashing claws and driving his knife into the joint where its leg met its hip. The creature screamed and fell, and Duhayan finished it with a brutal strike to the throat. But more were coming. "Run!" he shouted, pushing the princess and her handmaidens toward the right corridor. "Escape pods are 3 sections ahead. Do not stop for anything." "What about you?" Cyriline cried. "I will buy you time. Go now." They ran. Uravel's legs burned as she sprinted through corridors. She had walked with such dignity just hours before. Behind her, she heard the sounds of combat, roars of pain, crashes of bodies against walls, the wet sounds of violence that her civilized ears had never been forced to endure. Then silence. She did not know if that was good or bad. They reached the escape pod bay, and for a moment, Uravel felt hope surge in her chest. But the hope died when she saw what waited for Thema. Full Keth strike team of 8 warriors stood in formation, blocking access to the pods, and at their center stood the largest Keth she had ever seen, a massive scarred veteran whose armor was decorated with the bones of previous victims. "The princess?" he growled, his translator rendering his words in broken but understandable Galactic common. "How fortunate. We came for cargo, but we leave with royalty." The handmaidens screamed as the Keth soldiers grabbed them and threw them to the ground. Uravel tried to fight, tried to summon the dignity of her ancestors, but her body would not obey. She had never been in danger before. She had never faced violence. Her species had not needed to fight for millions of years, and the instincts that might have saved her had long since faded from Valorian blood. The commander grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground with one hand. "The Emperor will pay well for his daughter," he laughed. "Or perhaps the Zarath Dominion will pay more. They have always wanted Valorian slaves." Tears streamed down Uravel's face as she struggled uselessly against his grip. This was how she would die, or worse, how she would live as a captive, a trophy, a piece of property to be sold to the highest bidder. Then she heard footsteps, slow, steady, unhurried. The Keth turned, and Uravel saw him. Sergeant Kang Duhayan walked into the bay like he was taking a casual stroll. His uniform was torn, his face was bleeding from a cut above his eye, and his only weapon was the combat knife in his hand. But his eyes were something she had never seen before. They were the eyes of a predator, ancient, patient, utterly without fear. The Keth commander laughed. a harsh barking sound that echoed through the bay. One human? He mocked, dropping Uravel to the floor. One small, soft, weak human thinks he can challenge the Keth. Dahayan did not respond. He simply stood there, watching, waiting. The knife held loosely at his side. "Kill him slowly," the commander ordered his warriors. "Let the princes watch what happens to those who oppose us." 3 Keth warriors stepped forward, their claws extended, their teeth bared in hungry grins. They towered over the human like giants facing an insect, and then Dahayan moved. One move. What happened next would haunt Uravel's dreams for the rest of her life. The first Keth warrior swung its massive claws in a strike that should have torn Dahayan in half, but the human was no longer there. He moved like water, like shadow, like something that existed between moments rather than within them. The warrior's claws cut empty air, and before the creature could recover, Dahayan was inside its guard. His knife found the soft tissue beneath the Keth's jaw and drove upward into its brain. Warrior was dead before it knew it had been killed. The second Keth roared and lunged forward, but Dahayan used the falling body of the first as a shield, shoving the corpse into its path as the creature stumbled. Dahayan dropped low and slashed across the back of its leg, severing tendons that not even Keth armor could protect. The warrior collapsed, and Dahayan finished it with a precise strike to the base of the skull where the spine met the brain. 3 seconds had passed. 2 Keth were dead. The third warrior hesitated, and that hesitation cost him everything. Dahayan closed the distance in a single explosive movement, using his smaller size to slip under the creature's desperate swing. His knife punched through the warrior's throat, twisted, and withdrew in one fluid motion. Blood sprayed across the bay floor as the Keth fell, clutching at a wound no medic could repair in time. Uravel watched in frozen shock as the human turned to face the remaining 5 warriors and their commander. He was not even breathing hard. His face showed no anger, no hatred, no fear, only the cold, calculating focus of an apex predator at work. "What are you?" the Keth commander whispered, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in his voice. Dahayan did not answer with words. He simply began walking forward. The remaining warriors attacked together, thinking numbers would save them where skill had failed. Their brothers. They were wrong. Dahayan fought like nothing Uravel had ever seen or imagined. He did not block attacks. He redirected them, using the Keth's own strength and size against them. He targeted joints, pressure points, nerve clusters, vulnerabilities that his species had spent millions of years learning to exploit. Where the Keth relied on brute force and natural weapons, Dahayan used precision, timing, and a brutal efficiency that wasted no motion. One warrior fell with a shattered knee, then died as Dahayan's knife opened its throat. Another lost its balance when Dahayan swept its legs, and the human drove the blade through its eye socket before it hit the ground. A third managed to land a glancing blow that tore open Dahayan's shoulder. But even wounded, he kept fighting. He grabbed the creature's extended arm, used its own momentum to throw it into a 4th warrior, then killed them both while they were tangled together. 5th warrior turned to run. Dahayan threw his knife with perfect accuracy, and the blade buried itself in the back of the creature's neck. It fell face first onto the metal floor and did not move. Again, the entire fight had lasted less than 20 seconds. 8 Keth warriors, each one a trained killer 3 times the humans' size, lay dead or dying on the bay floor. Only the commander remained. The massive Keth stared at the carnage around him with eyes that could not comprehend what they were seeing. His warriors, the most feared raiders in the quadrant, had been butchered by a single human with nothing but a knife. Impossible, he breathed, backing away as Dahayan walked toward him. This is impossible. You are just a human. Dahayan reached down and pulled his knife from the fallen warrior's neck. Yes, he said, his voice quiet and terrifyingly calm. I am The commander drew his own blade as ceremonial weapon as long as Du Hyan was tall and screamed a challenge as he charged. He was faster than his fallen warriors, stronger, more experienced, none of it. Mataredo Hyan sidestepped the massive blade, moved inside the commander's reach, and struck once. The knife entered just below the Keth's sternum, angled upward, and pierced its heart. The commander's eyes went wide with shock and disbelief. He tried to speak, but only blood came from his mouth. Hyan withdrew the blade, and the Keth commander collapsed. The most feared pirate in the quadrant was dead. Silence fell over the escape pod. Bayerevol lay on the cold floor, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. Her handmaidens huddled together, too terrified to move or speak. Hyan walked toward them, stepping over bodies without looking at them. He knelt beside Uravel and checked her throat for injuries. His hands were covered in blood, but his touch was gentle. "Are you injured, Your Highness?" he asked. She could not answer. She could not speak at all. She simply stared at him, this quiet, unremarkable man who had just destroyed 8 monsters like they were nothing. "Your Highness?" he repeated, and there was genuine concern in his voice now. "Please respond. I need to know if you are hurt." She finally managed, her voice trembling. "I am not injured." Hyan nodded and helped her to her feet. "The ship's defenders have retaken the bridge," he said, his tone returning to that calm, professional neutrality she had found so irritating before. "The remaining Keth are retreating to their vessels. We will reach Station Axiar safely." He turned to check on the handmaidens, treating the situation as if he had not just done the impossible, as if he had not just proven that everything Uravel believed about humans was catastrophically wrong. She watched him work, efficient, capable, utterly uninterested in praise or recognition, and felt her entire understanding of the galaxy shifting beneath her feet. Humans were not primitive. They were not beneath. Notice, they were something far more dangerous, something the civilized species of the galaxy had forgotten existed. They were predators wearing the mask of prey, and she had just seen what happened when that mask came off. New understanding. The diplomatic summit at Station Axiar proceeded exactly as planned. Princess Uravel sat in the Grand Chamber, surrounded by representatives from 100 different species, negotiating trade agreements and settling minor disputes with the same skill that had made her father's empire great. She smiled at the appropriate moments, spoke with perfect diplomatic grace, and gave no outward sign that anything had changed. But everything had changed at night. Alone in her quarters on the station, she found herself unable to sleep every time she closed her eyes. She saw the escape pod bay, the bodies on the floor, the blood on the walls, and the human who had moved through violence like he was dancing. She had read the official reports. The Keth Syndicate had lost 37 warriors in the attack on the Starlight Throne, and their commander's death had thrown their entire organization into chaos. Intelligence analysts predicted it would take them years to recover all, because of one human with a knife. On the final day of the summit, after the last treaty was signed and the last handshake completed, Uravel requested a private meeting with Sergeant Kang Du-hyun, arrived at her quarters exactly on time, standing at attention with his hands clasped behind his back. The wound on his shoulder had been treated, and new bandages covered the cut above his eye. But otherwise he looked exactly as he had on the day they first met. Quiet, unassuming, forgettable. "At ease, Sergeant," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. "Please sit. This is not an official matter." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the informality. But Obaydireval studied him for a long moment, trying to reconcile the humble soldier before her with the lethal force she had witnessed in the bay. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. His eyebrows rose slightly, the most emotion she had ever seen him display. "Your Highness, there is no need." "There is every need," she interrupted firmly. I treated you with contempt from the moment we met. I dismissed you as primitive. As beneath my notice, I was arrogant, and I was wrong. Duhain was silent, his expression unreadable. Why did you not say anything? She asked, genuine frustration creeping into her voice. Why did you not defend yourself when I insulted your species? Because it would not have helped, Your Highness. What do you mean? He paused, choosing his words carefully. Humans are used to being underestimated, he said. When we first made contact with the galaxy, every species looked at us the way you did, small, soft, short-lived. From a planet so dangerous that most races thought it was a death sentence just to live there. They saw our lack of claws and armor and venom, and they assumed we were weak. But you are not weak. No. Your Highness, we are not. He leaned forward slightly, and for a moment, she caught a glimpse of the predator behind his calm exterior. On Earth, we were never the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous, he explained. We survived because we learned to think, to plan, to work together. We turned our weaknesses into strengths and our environment into a weapon. By the time other species evolved intelligence on our world, we had already driven most of them to extinction. Uravel felt a chill run down her spine. But we prefer it when others underestimate us, he continued, returning to his neutral tone. It keeps us safe. If the galaxy knew what humans were truly capable of, they would fear us. And fear leads to conflict. Better to be dismissed as primitives than to be seen as a threat. Then why show me? She asked. Why reveal what you are? Because you needed protecting, he answered simply. And because I trust you, Your Highness. She blinked in surprise. You trust me? After how I treated you? You were wrong about humans, but that does not make you a bad person. You were taught to see us a certain way, and you believed what you were taught. But when the truth was shown to you, you accepted it instead of denying it. That takes courage. Uravel did not know how to respond. No one had ever called her courageous before. She was royalty. Courage was not supposed to be necessary for someone like her. Sergeant, she said slowly, why did you protect me? I gave you every reason to resent me. I treated you like a servant, like an animal. You could have fled to an escape pod and left me to my fate, and no one would have blamed you. Dahian's expression softened just slightly. Because protecting people is what we do, he said. It does not matter if they thank us. It does not even matter if they deserve it when someone needs help. Humans help them. That is who we are, even at the cost of your own life. Especially then, Your Highness. They sat in silence for a long moment as Uravel absorbed his words. Finally, she stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so safe. So civilized, I think, she said quietly, that the galaxy has forgotten what humans truly are. We see your short lives and assume you are insignificant. We see your soft bodies and assume you are harmless. But you are neither of those things. Are you? No, Your Highness, we are not. She turned to face him. I would like you to remain as my permanent escort. Sergeant, if you are willing. Surprise flickered across his features again. Your Highness, there are many qualified officers who could. I do not want a qualified officer, she said firmly. I want you. Will you accept? Duhayan rose from his chair and stood at attention. It would be an honor, Your Highness. 2 weeks later, Princess Uravel returned home to Valoria Prime. Her father greeted her in the throne room, relieved to see her safe after the reports of the attack had reached him. I understand your human escort performed admirably, the Emperor said, studying her with his ancient, knowing eyes. The reports say he single-handedly defeated the Keth-Strike Ting. The reports do not do him justice. Father, the Emperor nodded slowly. I see, and you have requested that he remain in your service permanently. Yes, that is unusual for someone who did not want a human escort at all just weeks ago. Uravel glanced at Duhayan. who stood quietly near the door, watching and waiting as he always did. "I have learned something important." "Father," she said, turning back to face the throne. "The galaxy has become complacent. We have built our empires on technology and diplomacy. And we have forgotten that there are older ways to survive. The humans remember those ways. They carry them in their blood and bones. And what do you suggest we do with this knowledge?" Uravel stood tall, her voice carrying the authority of a princess who had faced death and survived. "We should listen to them. Father, not because we are weak, but because we have grown blind. The humans see threats we have forgotten how to recognize, and they know how to face them. We would be fools not to learn from them." The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, a rare expression on his ancient face. "Perhaps you have learned more from this journey than I expected," he said. "Very well. The human stays, and perhaps you are right that we have lessons to learn from his kind." Uravel bowed and left the throne room with Duhayan at her side as they walked through the crystal corridors of the palace. She glanced at him. "Did you hear that, Sergeant? My father has acknowledged that humans have value. A generous compliment." "Your Highness, you do not seem excited." Duhayan shrugged slightly. "We do not require acknowledgement to know our worth." "Your Highness, we never have." Uravel smiled. "I think I am only beginning to understand your species." "Sergeant, that is all we can ask, Your Highness." They reached her chambers, and Duhayan took up his position outside the door, the same position she had once thought was beneath her notice. But now, when she looked at the quiet humans standing guard in the hallway, she did not see a primitive or a servant. She saw a guardian. She saw a protector. She saw everything the galaxy had forgotten to fear, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never make the mistake of underestimating a human again.